Hello, and thank you for joining us for the TAA webinar, Writing and Revising, the 20-Year Evolution of an Oceanography Textbook, presented by Al Trujillo. Al is a distinguished teaching professor of earth sciences at Palomar College in San Marcos, California. He has worked with his co-author, Hal Thurman, on Essentials of Oceanography since 1995, the 6th edition, and they have also co-authored Introductory Oceanography, which is now in its 10th edition. Hello, Al. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Kim. I'm happy to be here, and as my students will tell you, I'm more than happy to talk about my textbook. So I wanted to welcome all of you to the webinar. I'm on the Pacific Coast, so it's good morning for those of you on this side, and good afternoon for those of you on the East Coast. But what I thought I'd do is I'd talk a little bit about what my journey has been like about becoming an oceanography textbook author. And also at the end, I'm going to raise a few questions. So as you'll know, we're getting close to the end when you see a couple slides that have some questions about them. So I'm going to progress through my slideshow, and there's a picture of the cover of the current edition, the 11th edition of Essentials of Oceanography. And there I am on an oceanographic expedition in Antarctica. I was there about just over a year ago down in Antarctica. So how did I get involved in all this? How did all this happen? How did this all come out? And it all goes back to a very faithful National Association of Geoscience Teachers field trip in Baja, California back in 1991. So I was on this field trip, and this association has all these geoscience educators from around the local region, from Southern California. And we were on this field trip, and somebody said, "Hey, did you know the oceanography textbook author, Hal Thurman, is on the field trip?" And I said, "Boy, I'd love to meet him." And they said, "Well, he's right over there." So I went up and introduced myself. I said, "Hi, my name's Al Trujillo, and I teach oceanography at Palomar College. In fact, I just started teaching there. And I use your textbook." And he said, "Well, what do you think of it?" And I said, "Well, there's some changes I'd make." And he said, "Like what?" And I said, "Well, how much time do you have? Because I've got detailed notes. So if you really want to know, we can get together." He said, "That would be great. Let's get together tonight." So we were on this multi-day field trip, and we had an evening program in Ensenada. And for those of you that have never been here, this is what Ensenada looks like here. And that's the main street. So we get together after our evening program. It was probably about 9 o'clock or so, 9:30. And we found ourselves in this big meeting area. We had this evening program. And so we wandered down the main street of Ensenada, which is shown there, and we found a quiet corner of a bar. All I remember is upstairs somewhere. And so I had a copy of the book with me. I was preparing for classes the following week, and that's one of the morals of the story that I tell my students, to be prepared. So I had a copy of the book with me, and we found this quiet corner of a bar, and he kept buying me cold Coronas, and I kept telling him about the book. And he was taking copious notes on all these notes about all the different suggestions that I was making. And for me at the time, it was like, wow, this is cool. I got the ear of a textbook author, and he's actually listening to me. And now I would love to run into somebody with those kind of detailed notes being a textbook author. So I completely understand that. So anyway, we went to about 2 in the morning, and we just went through the book page by page, and I kept telling him all the different things I would change in the book there. And there's a picture of my co-author, Hal Thurman, up in the right here. And I'm sad to report that he actually passed away just over a year ago, and I do dearly miss him. He had a incredible memory, even way to the end, and knew where he got things from in terms of where important parts of the book came from, the original resources and stuff. So what happened with this is, we actually sat down, and I had the 3rd edition at the time, and these are the kind of notes. This on the right here, it shows the kind of notes I scribbled in, all sorts of notes about what I would change and what I didn't like and all those kinds of things. So this is the kind of thing that we went through. So this was for the 3rd edition back in 1991, that was current. And then a few years went by, And, the field trip ended and we went our separate ways, and I actually changed textbooks. But what was interesting is that in the 4th edition of the book, almost all the suggestions that I had made were actually done in that book. And I was credited, and so I just thought that was really cool. And then he had worked on it for a few more years, and then he called me up a few years later after all this, and had changed, and I switched to a different book and some other things. And so he called me up out of the blue, and he says, "Hi, this is Hal Thurman. Do you remember me?" And I said, "Yes, of course, the Oceanography textbook author." And he said, "Well, I've retired from teaching, and I would, my publisher would like me to co-author with somebody who's currently teaching. So I'm wondering if you'd be interested in co-authoring the book with me." And this is one of these phone calls. It's like you literally have to sit down. It's like, I've got friends that their whole ambition about their life is to write a book and all these other things, and that's just not me. So I asked Hal, I said, "Are you sure you've got the right person? Because I really don't have a lot of ambition to be a textbook author or write a book or anything like that." And he said, "Well, I would love for you to get involved in the book because I really like your ideas. I think you've got great ideas about what kinds of things need to be changed." And I still asked him, it's like, "Are you sure you've got the right person? Because I just don't know whether, I'm not even that good at English." And he said, "Well, you get better as you work on it." So I started, I got brought on the 5th edition, and I started working on it and making improvements to it. So then in the 6th edition was the first edition that came out with my name on it. And you'll notice it's Thurman and Trujillo there. So this was the first edition that I contributed to. And really what was interesting about it is that I really thought it was going to be more of a collaborative effort between Hal and myself. But in reality, when he retired, he really wanted to get out of it, and he wanted somebody just to take it over. So it became clear early on that it was really kind of my whole thing, which again, I was questioning. It's like, do you really know what you're doing with this? I mean, turning the reins over to me of your book, I don't really know what I'm doing. What if I change things that people really like? And Hal said, "Well, your reviewers are going to let you know about that, but pretty much just do what you want to do with it." And my whole philosophy of writing is where I do a lot of writing just like how I presented in class. So that's called talk writing, like how I would talk through it and explain it in class. So that was the 6th edition. Then here's the 7th edition of Essentials of Oceanography. And then the 8th edition, if you notice, this one's been labeled as my work copy. It's one of the most valuable things that I have in my office is my work copy because it has all my notes in it. And if you notice this, I became the lead author, again, because Hal wasn't really contributing so much and really kind of gave me free reign, which I actually really appreciate that, he was able to trust me that I would do a good job with it. And then here's the 9th edition of Essentials. And if you notice, we've gone through a couple different publishing companies from Macmillan to Merrill to Prentice Hall, now Pearson Education. And this is the 10th edition of Essentials. And if you notice, the TAA logo for the TEXT, Textbook Excellence Award, which this book was awarded back in 2012. So that brings us to the current edition that came out actually just last year. It carries a 2014 copyright, but it was published in January of 2013. So there's the current edition, the 11th edition here, and it is the #1 selling, I'm proud to say, the #1 selling oceanography textbook worldwide. So I'm very pleased and proud of the fact that other instructors like how I write and like how I present the material enough to adopt it for their own classes. All right, so I wanted to talk a little bit about what's different and how it's evolved over this 20 years here. So I picked out some pages and I digitized them from the older edition. This is actually from the 5th edition, from the book that I started working on. And this is a chapter opening spread, and we couldn't really do that much. We're kind of limited with 2 colors, and that's all we had was 2 colors, brown and blue, that we could use for figures. And I think it was in the 8th edition, we went to full color, and that was like a big thing. All the figures are now full color. So here's the same chapter in the new book. It's a 2-page spread, and it's just much more appealing in terms of what it looks like. And again, that's one of the ways to get students to read the book, is have it appealing, have it look appealing. So you got a nice image with, you know, how as an oceanographer, you might actually, as a chemical oceanographer, you might actually view the ocean with these water molecules, you know, with billions of water molecules that are in there. And then it's got these essential concepts. So there's some study aids here. I added this in this particular edition called Word Cloud. So it has all the key terms that are listed here with various font sizes. The ones that are used most often are the ones that are larger in size, like for water in this particular chapter on water and seawater. Salinity is mentioned many times. Also things like heat capacity, parts per thousand, that's the measurement, thermocline, molecule, pycnocline, specific heat. These are all the concepts here. And the other thing we did too is it helps to point students to where the glossary is, that it's in the back of the book, and all these terms are defined there. So this is kind of where it was before and where it's evolved to here. Here's a comparison of old versus new design elements. Very similar page left in an older edition. That's again the 5th edition. And then on the newer edition, if you notice, we have a lot of white space, inclusion of a lot of white space here. Figures with these balloons and a numbered order to it, much more appealing to view that rather than something like this. Again, these old 2-color ones. There's some chemical equations that were in there. And from my students, and I do, for extra credit, I do offer my students the opportunity to review a chapter with me. And many students said, gee, you know, this kind of stuff in chapter 1, that like freaks me out. It's got some chemistry in there right at the beginning. So we don't hit them with that until chapter 5. We want to snag them first before we throw too much chemistry and complicated chemical formulas at them there. So there's some old versus new design elements. Here's another page from chapter 1. You know, we've taken this diagram in the old 2-color, added new art program. And the other thing that you'll notice with this is that we have this wrapping of text. So the text has white space, it has room for figures there. We can have larger figures and have this white space there. And also these concept checks here. So we have lots of new design elements to make it more appealing there. The end of chapter material used to have a summary, key terms, questions, and exercises. And these kinds of things, you know, there's a lot of text. We use the word cloud now instead of these key terms. For the summary, we actually embed this, or we embed some, I'm getting ahead of myself. The summary has been redesigned to look like this. It's broken out by section with a key figure from the text to kind of remind students, do you remember this figure? That was kind of the important part of that section. This figure is the important part of that section. That figure is the important part of that, with a summary, what study resources there are, critical thinking questions. So this is now a 2-page spread of kind of like little mini boxes of the most important things from each section. So we've broken this out by section. These questions and exercises, they're actually not at the end of the chapter anymore. They're now embedded where they belong with each section. And so that allows students to read a few pages in a section. It's chunked out and kind of more independent each section is, so that students can read a few pages, 2, 3, 4 pages, and then they have some questions, some review questions right there, instead of reading, you know, the whole chapter, and then at the end of the chapter, trying to remember, geez, you know, at question number 1, was that even in this chapter? Trying to remember all the way back to the beginning. So we've chunked material out to make it easier to study from. And that might be kind of an odd thing because, you know, aren't we always looking at how to make this easier to study? And I guess I'm a little bit embarrassed to admit, as a textbook author, that, you know, I just wanted to be complete and accurate and thorough and explain it well. But I had never really thought about how to make this easier for students to study from. And that seems like such a weird thing not to think about. But my editor at Pearson really kind of had this idea of, look, they've actually looked at how students study material, how they use the book to study with, and how they read short number of pages, and to make it more broken out into those smaller chunks really helps students study. So I'm glad to have some of these new ideas that I can incorporate into my book. It makes it look much more modern as well. All right, maps. I'm a big fan of maps. I love maps. And on the left side here, these are comparison of the exact same map. I work with a map studio to create these maps that have just much better appeal. For one thing, just a different map projection where it looks more globe-like. And also, again, you can see this wrapping of the text. It kind of makes like the figures a part of the text, which we really couldn't do before. Here's a really old version of the way we used to portray data in the book. And here it's called an orange peel projection, where it's like you take the Earth and you cut it along the continent so the oceans aren't cut. And this was just so hard for students to look at and understand, what in the heck is that? So here's the same map, same information. Again, if you look at this current map showing the ocean surface currents, we had only two colors, brown and blue, and that was it. So here we have a variety of different colors that we can use, and just having the temperature, warm versus cold, really helps bring out and see some of the patterns involved with that. And we have worked extensively with the figures. A lot of my students tell me that when I meet with them, I always ask them, how do you read the book? And most of my students tell me what they think is reading is really what they're doing is scanning the book. So they'll kind of page through it, they'll read little parts of it, but they'll look at the figures. They're very visual, so they'll look at all the figures. So I've kind of redesigned the book around the figures, that the figures should tell the story of the whole chapter. And you should be able to get the basic concepts and ideas just by looking at the figures as you go through. I would love it if all my students read every single part of the book, but I know they don't do that. So really what they're doing is they're kind of like skimming here, but they're calling that reading. So here's one of the figures. Here's one of the older figures here. Again, two color, only using blue. But just hard for students to understand here. And it really should be displayed as a series of these pie diagrams. So I put this out into two different pie diagrams with some different colors here. It has kind of this three-dimensional look, and again, beautiful text wrapping around here to make the images kind of like they're embedded within the text itself. Here's another example of an old versus a new figure. And, for a lot of these figures as well, we've got new information. This is a tree of life, and very simple on the left side there. Probably not even very good images of something like a whale, hard to tell scale, something like that as well. But here's the same diagram with some new information about this lateral gene transfer. So it's really not quite like, a branching tree. There's some swapping of genetic information back and forth, but all going back to this communal ancestral community of primitive cells and the different groupings here. So that's one of the newer figures. Again, color coding it to make it easier for students to relate to, using better examples of different types of organisms for all the major groups and taxonomic classifications. And here's an old versus new figure. Here's one of my older ones on the left and a newer one on the right. Color really helps on this as well. Notice that we've added as well some description right in the figure so that you don't have to look down at the caption, try to figure out what's going on. They're labeled here. And one of the other main things that we've done, and this is to encourage women to go into science, is instead of showing guys in the picture, we try to show gals in the picture. So we changed the guy to a gal. Not much needed to be done to really change that there. And I've done this throughout the book as well, just to encourage, just to have women see other women that are actually in oceanography, working with materials and equipment and actually doing things. So that's one of the things I try to do, is to get pictures of women that are actually working in the field of oceanography. By the way, this is my wife. She's holding a sextant here as a navigation instrument, so I'm able to get pictures of family and friends into my book as well. And big new artwork program in this edition. I happened to meet this guy who's a marine biologist, but also a very talented graphic artist. So he has the scientific understanding of organisms to draw them accurately, but also the creativity to be able to draw them in such a way that it really helps explain the kinds of things I'm trying to explain in the book. And I just love his art. It's just so three-dimensional. And it almost looks like real, except like for this one, the gills are cut away. So when you first look at this, it's like, wow, that's a picture of a real fish. It's like, well, wait a minute, it's got the gills that are exposed. That's not normally what happens with that. So we included a whole series of new artwork. We're continually improving it. Here, this is showing some of the key differences between a sea lion and a seal in terms of internal anatomy and hip structure versus the front forelimb. So we're always working on this, and this is one of my favorite of Justin's that he's done. It's a collage of different whales of the world. And again, when you first look at this, it's like, wow, it's a beautiful picture of a whale. It's like, wait a minute, how would you actually get all those whales together? And with a scuba diver in there to show the scale as well. So these are the kinds of new art pieces that the book actually includes in this edition. I've mentioned a bit about some of the new design elements, and this particular pair of figures actually shows us nicely with some wrapping around of some of the different figures here. I've tried to keep the captions small. Again, my students tell me if the caption's too long, they won't read it. And by the way, my students also tell me that if there's just a full page of text with no figure, no picture, no diagram, they'll often skip that. Then that just terrifies me that students would actually skip that. But it just looks too dense and too heavy. So a lot of the design elements are made to make this look not quite so threatening as a science book here. Here's the concept check here. These are the end of chapter questions. We're calling them concept checks. And so here's like 3 questions about this section. And if you can answer these, then you should be able to move on. And if you can't, then those answers are right here in the text here. Also, these essential concepts, a summary statement for each section, and then the student sometimes ask feature, which is one of my favorite parts of the book to write. It's all these odd questions that I get in class that I've actually been keeping track of and used them to write answers to. There's a couple of other types of wrapping here. Love this with the map, just really includes it there. Pictures. Here's another, here's one of my boxes. We don't call them boxes. My students have told me that if it's in a box, they'll typically skip it. And I asked them, well, why? Why would you skip that? It's like, well, if it's in a box, it's probably not so important. If it was really important, it would be in the text. If it's in a box, it's kind of ancillary or not that important. So I thought, okay, I get it. Let's not call them boxes. And then what I did in this edition is I looked through all the boxes and I was like, what is really, really important that should be in the text that's not? So I moved a lot of the stuff that was in a box back into the text so students get that indication that that's important material. But this one's kind of an interesting one because it's just got an interesting story about when you put oceanographic equipment down on the seafloor along the mid-ocean ridge, it's so incredibly active volcanically that it often destroys the equipment. And this is the story about rescuing this instrument package that was caught in a lava flow along the Galapagos ridge, part of the mid-ocean ridge system. And you'll notice this here. This is, I'll enlarge it there. It's a QR code called Quick Response or QR code. You see them a lot on, I don't know, magazines, the backs of buses, people that are ads. I've seen them on billboards. You know, and what this is, it's a smartphone app that you can use to scan this, and then it will take you directly to their website. So for those of you that do have your phone with you or other mobile device and do have the app, feel free to scan that right now, and that will take you directly to the website. So we have these QR codes that are embedded, that are with that are links to embedded videos or animations, or for this particular one, it was a underwater video, and I narrated this to explain to my students what's happening, what they're seeing, what they're looking at, what the robotic instrument that's trying to free this is actually doing. So lots of interesting things that you can link to. And there was an article that I wrote for the, well, it was the interview that I did about using QR codes. And that was in a TAA newsletter article about, I think that was about 2 or 3 months ago. I talked all about these QR codes. But yeah, if you actually scan this, and I have students that actually, I don't allow students to use cell phones in class, but when I have one of these up, I'll have the QR code up, and many students will take out their cell phone and then actually use it for an educational purpose right then. Imagine that. Okay, so let's move on. Oh yeah, I wanted to mention a little bit more about the students sometimes ask my favorite parts of the book to write, and they're actual real questions from students. And that's how I can tell if students are reading the book. Sometimes they'll ask the exact same question in class. But I think they're just interesting asides. They're not important enough to put in the book. My students say they actually do read them because they want to know what other students are asking. And they'll read the answer whether they think they know the answer or not. Sometimes it's just interesting stuff here. Like this one, have humans ever explored the deepest ocean trenches? And before James Cameron went down in 2012 into the Mariana Trench and equaled the deep diving record, it was done in the 1960s. So, you know, this was before people walked on the moon even. So we've been to the deepest part of the ocean, just 2 people, and now 3 with James Cameron going down there. Here's another one. Why do carbonated beverages burn my throat when I drink them? You know, here's just good practical stuff, you know. These are things that I get asked by students in class, and I just really like being able to put them in there. And if you notice, you know, we have this major column on text, but this helps break up some of the text by putting these kind of odd questions in here. And another one here, what is the strategy behind adding salt to a pot of water when making pasta? So, you know, anything about cooking or things like that, they're always very interesting about letting students know the scientific basis behind some of the things that they experience. Here's a few more. What does the garbage patch look like? This big floating place in the Eastern Pacific that it has a concentration of floating plastics and other garbage here. How can we clean it up? You know, things like that. Here's a new one. What are the phases? How do the phases of the moon influence human behavior? And, you know, so I get to write stuff like, you know, about werewolves and, you know, all sorts of weird stuff. I can use my humor. I can answer it like I would in class. I can use incomplete sentences. You know, it's just kind of fun to be able to write these here. And this one I just love. And the student, I'll never forget the student who actually asked this to class. He was just so embarrassed. He raised his hand and he said, how do whales, you know, do it? And he got all red and everybody laughed. And you know, I'd never been asked that in class. And it's like, well, you know, my background and training is in geology. And, you know, I don't really know. But doesn't it seem kind of like unusual that they could do this because they're floating and they got no obvious appendages and all these other things. So I do some research and then that gives me good topics to write about here. The other new thing about my textbook is that it includes this online resource called Mastering, which has animations and Google Earth activities. It has really cool testing modules that allow students to work with some of the images from the textbook and drop and drag the correct answers for those kinds of things. It's got a great gradebook feature where you can see exactly how long students have spent on particular questions and what the most common wrong answer was, and if they used the hint, and you know, all these other things. So you really get a lot of good information about their performance during these quizzes. And I give these just about every week to my students. So that's what the portal looks like, and students need to log on, and then they have access to all the mastering content and the student study area and all these other cool resources that help students learn. Students love this, by the way. And in terms of updating new material in this edition, I'm on a 3-year publishing cycle, so it gets published every 3 years. And in the previous 3 years, there was the 2010 Gulf of Mexico Deepwater Horizon oil spill that occurred, and that was all in the news. So again, I put it as a box, but the next edition, I'll move that from a box into the text. In 2011, the big Japanese tsunami and resulting, or the big Japanese earthquake and resulting tsunami occurred, and that was all in the news, and it's still in the news, and some of that material is floating along in the Pacific and starting to arrive along the Pacific coast, by the way. So there's lots of information about that, and again, I put it in there initially as a box, but I'm going to put that into the text, and then all sorts of new information about climate change, including the record low Arctic ice that occurred in 2012. So, you know, I have all these different new things that I can put in here. So it really does need to be updated. And then there's, of course, errors and, you know, different ways of making material more understandable. I get a lot of information from my students. They'll tell me passages that they're reading over and over and over again and just don't get it. So that's where I try to focus my concentrated efforts into improving that. Maybe it needs a figure. Maybe it needs an animated figure. Maybe it needs to be broken out into another way in which to explain it, or a better example, or an analogy or something. So those are the kinds of things that I work on. And I also added this, you know, and again, it's kind of an odd thing. I hadn't thought about this before, but there's nothing in the book that talks about how to read the book effectively. So I went to a seminar here on my campus by our reading department, and they talked about specifically how to read a science textbook. And I figured, well, you know, since I write a science textbook, I should know what they're telling students how to read a science textbook. And they have this SQ4R method: survey, question, read, recite, write, and review. And so that's kind of, you know, it's like a user's guide for students. What are the most effective ways in which to read a book? And this is based on a whole large amount of evidence about students and their ability to learn information from printed matter and what really helps them to do that. So I've added that in the preface. And I also mentioned these animations, and I wanted to show you one. I have a whole series of these geoscience animations. So I've worked with a team of geoscience educators, and we've looked at the concepts that are particularly difficult for students to understand. And so we've made these animations to kind of have it where students can watch an animation. It covers a particular concept and talks about what we know about how it works and why. So I wanted to show you one of these. It may take me a moment to get this to work correctly here, but let me show this to you.
Located off the east coast of the United States is one of the world's most powerful current systems, the Gulf Stream. It distributes a large amount of warm water from the Gulf of Mexico and Caribbean Sea northward to the North Atlantic Ocean. Data from Earth orbiting satellites equipped with advanced, very high resolution radiometers can be used to determine sea surface temperatures. In this false color image, red and orange colors indicate warm ocean water, while blue and purple indicate colder water. The Gulf Stream is visible as a sinuous band of red, wrapping around the southern tip of Florida, moving up the eastern seaboard, where it changes color to yellow and then flows into the waters of the North Atlantic Ocean. The position of the Gulf Stream varies once it passes Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. In the simplified map view, the Gulf Stream can be seen changing its position and wiggling around in a snake-like fashion. These fluctuations create curving loops of water known as meanders, similar to those seen in the shapes of streams on land. The ocean transfers heat in a similar fashion as our atmosphere, to something akin to storms. These ocean storms are known as eddies. The Gulf Stream produces eddies that spin off of the primary current path and move heat outward. Eddies can either have a cold core, where the water at its center is cold, or a warm core, where there is warm water at its center. Eddies are formed when rings are pinched off as the Gulf Stream meanders. The direction that the eddy pinches off determines whether it has a cold core or a warm core. If the eddy pinches off into the warm water to the south, cold water is captured at its core. On the other hand, if the eddy pinches off into the colder water to the north, it captures warm water at its core. These eddies sometimes last for several months, providing a unique ecosystem for marine life. Eventually, the eddies dissipate into the surrounding water, or in some cases, they rejoin the Gulf Stream. The Gulf Stream moves an impressive amount of water and heat into the northern latitudes. As it does so, it directly affects weather and climate patterns over the entire globe.
All right, so that was one of my animations, and I found that, just using words alone is not nearly as effective. Like you could see with the meandering of the Gulf Stream, the pinching off of those eddies. It just helps so much having an animation that's created that shows these processes in action. So I use these in class. We have now, usually we create about 10 new ones with each edition. And we started on, I think, the 8th edition. So we've got about 40 of these. Let's see, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th. Yeah, we've got about 40 of these. I find them really valuable. All right, well, let's move on. So I mentioned as we're getting close to the end, I'm going to ask a couple questions here. And this is something I get asked all the time. So what is writing a textbook like? And I often tell them, well, it's kind of like, or I tell my students, it's kind of like writing a 600-page term paper that never ends. It's like you kind of keep writing it and revising it. And they used to equate it to painting the Golden Gate Bridge, because I had heard that they have a full-time paint crew that starts on one end and then they paint it all the way across, and then by the time they're done, years later, it's time to start on the other end. I've actually researched this, and they actually do have a full-time paint crew, but they don't do it end to end. They work on it, all the time. So maybe that's a good analogy. Maybe that's not. I don't know, but it does take a considerable amount of time, and maybe it's a little less dangerous than being suspended like this guy is above the so high in the air here. And then this is something that I think a lot about, and I think it's a very interesting time to be a textbook author. And what does the future hold for e-text? And this guy, Arnie Duncan, said this in 2012, that textbooks should be obsolete. And it's a very interesting thing. We're really getting more into this digital format here. In fact, the president of my publishing company, Pearson Education, he made this claim just last year. He said, well, right now, our distribution of printed text to e-text is 80% printed and 20% e-text. And that's about what I see in my classes. About 20% of my students have an e-text. But he says in 3 years, it's going to flip-flop. It's going to be 20% printed text and 80% e-text. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's so fast, man. That's like really changing. And that was really hard for me to believe that could happen. And I'm not sure if that's going to be true or not, but it makes me think, as I really think through this, and how we're getting all these ways in which to have a textbook. In fact, here's a picture of my text actually on an iPad. So here's an iPad app, and it's got a Kindle reader, and this edition has got all these ways in which to view this. It's got an e-text to view online, but it's got downloadable for iPad and Kindle. And it makes me think, maybe it won't be, only 20% printed and 80% e-text, but man, it might be close. So it's an interesting thing that I think about a lot. I don't really know how fast students will switch over to it. So, but that's what I wanted to talk to you about, and I'm going to end here, and I'm going to turn on my my camera, my video cam, so you can see it's actually me that's been doing this. By the way, the presentation is available at my website, and also for every edition, I publish or I put on my website what's new in the book, and it's a 7-page list of what's new in the 11th edition. So that's also at my website. So I'm going to mute my microphone, and Kim, if you could let me know if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Al. That was really great. We're going to take questions now. I have a question. How does one manage getting permissions for all the pictures that go into a textbook? I'm not hearing you, Al.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for letting me know. I forgot to unmute my line there. That's a great question. So early on in the process, starting in the 6th and 7th editions, I was the one who was doing that. So I would contact researchers. I'd see pictures in original journal articles, original research journal articles, and I'd think, boy, that's a great picture. I'd love to have that in my book. So I'd write to them, and when you write to people directly, I've pretty much had a very positive response from people. They're pleased to be able to kind of showcase their work in something like an oceanography textbook. Sometimes it's hard to get images from people because it's hard to contact them. There's some great shots that I remember trying to get of surfing and surfers, but very difficult to actually get a hold of the people that are responsible for that. But in general, I was the one doing that. But now the book's been doing well enough for me to actually have a permissions editor. So the permissions editor actually does all that. So what I do is I indicate what images that I'd like to use in the book. I indicate where the source of the image is from, or we have a photo researcher as well. A photo researcher would get the photos, and that comes with the permissions. You have to pay for that, but that's done that way. But it helps a lot by having a permissions editor because they're the ones that actually contact the people and trying to get permission to actually use it. But early on, it was just me. I was doing it.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, with students using both e-text and printed text in your classes, is it a challenge getting everyone on the same page, literally and figuratively?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's in the past, they've done this differently with the e-text having different page numbers, but now for the e-text and for the iPad and Kindle apps, for all those, they actually have the same page numbers. So I could say, okay, open your book to page 279, and the students with a physical copy would be able to open that, and the people with the reader could actually go to page, they just, do search page 279, and they go right to it. So in the past, it's been a problem, but now they've, my publishers realized how it's used in class like this, and it needs to coordinate. I can't say, or it makes it difficult to say, okay, for those of you with a printed copy, go to page 279. For those of you with a Kindle app, go to this particular page number because it's different. And for those of you with an iPad, go, so that just ties up too much time. So they are actually consistent in terms of those page numbers, which I really appreciate.
Okay, the next question is, how do you see the revision process changing as digital books take over?
Well, it's already changed quite a bit. I remember when I first started working on this, what would happen is they would send me page proofs, printed page proofs. This is before email. This is kind of before digital, editing. It was all done where they would print out a copy of what the pages in the book would look like. And they'd send them to me via either UPS or FedEx, and it had to be insured. And, it was like a very precious copies. So I would get those, and then I would actually mark, I would write on those. I would actually, use a pen, a red pen, and say, change this here, and can we move that there, and all that kind of thing. And then I would make a copy of those so I could have it in case they got lost on the shipping on the way back. But now in terms of the page proof process, those are posted at an FTP site, so it's a site that I can access with a password. It's run by my publishing company. And it just, I can go and download those, and then it's a PDF file. So then I annotate it using Adobe Acrobat, and I can, you can do lots of different things. You can draw lines and add comments, and can we move this here? So there's much more detail that you can actually put in there rather than just like writing on. You can actually really draw things and link to documents. You can upload documents, or for instance, there might be a figure and it's really small in the book, and I'm thinking, because it's small, it doesn't look good. Maybe how about we use this figure? I can attach that figure, and we can really do some interesting things, and we're almost like doing this in real time. And I kind of envision it going to that way. It's kind of like I use in my classes, I use Google Docs, where you have one document open and multiple people can work on it. So I have students working in groups, and they're actually uploading stuff, and they're writing it, and they're typing, and they're correcting each other. It's really kind of a cool collaboration tool. And I think that that's where this is going. It's going to be like a collaborative effort where, you don't download it, work on it, and upload it. You actually work on it live in real time, and you might be actually talking with your co-author or talking with your editor, and you're both editing the same document at the same time. So I could kind of see that coming here soon.
Yeah. It sounds really interesting because it's really a time-saving exercise also.
Yeah, that had a huge time lag, because what would happen is, especially with a co-author, I'm trying to remember exactly how this worked. I don't think we got individual copies. We got a copy that got sent to Hal, and then he'd make a few comments in it, and then it would get sent to me, and I'd see Hal's comments, and then I either change them or keep them or add to them more, and so I seem to remember that those printed page proofs were really valuable, and I was worried about getting those lost in the mail somewhere.
Well, the next question is, how did you find your illustrator? Did you know this person, or did your publisher find him?
Yeah, one of the things that I do on the side as well, is, in addition to teaching and to working on the book, for about the last 20 years, I've worked for National Geographic as a naturalist on board their expedition ships. So National Geographic has as their travel agent, as their the people who provide the travel for National Geographic, called Lindblad Expedition. So I work with all these other naturalists. So I met Justin. Actually, he's an underwater specialist. I worked with him on board the ship that I work on. I'll be working up there in Southeast Alaska this summer, actually. And I met him, and I saw some of his artwork, and I was just so impressed with that it was a chance encounter that I met him. And so I asked him, hey, would you be interested in doing work for the book and making some figures specific to it? And he said, boy, I'd just be so honored to work on the book. I actually, when I studied marine biology, I actually used your book. So I would just be really thrilled to be able to make some new diagrams and figures. So that's what he's worked on, and we're gonna keep him employed and working on a whole group of new figures for the next edition.
So you have a lot of say in who the illustrator is. It's not just a publisher comes in and takes your ideas for illustrations and hires the illustrator and all of that. You do have a lot of say in it.
Right. Well, yeah, they do have illustrators that work for Pearson. They have an art department. So I actually work with 3 different art studios. So I work with one that just does the maps. I work with one that just does the graphs. And I work with another that does general figures. So, and they're pretty good. They, we have to go back and forth. So I'll kind of draw something up. They want me to draw it up, and I'm not a very good drawer. But they want me to draw something up. So I'll draw it like how I show it in class. And I'll send it in, and then they'll send me back, is this what you're looking for? Can we do this with it? Maybe we could do like a top view of it instead of a side view. Maybe we could do both, put it in 2 separate figures. I mean, what do you want to do with this? So there's a lot of back and forth with that. And their art studio is pretty good with marine organisms, but again, they're not marine biologists. So I just happened to, by chance, meet a marine biologist that also has all these really cool graphic art skills, that knows how to create all these images. I'm not sure what Justin uses as his program, but he creates them all digitally, and he uses actual figures. Like he'll do a search of like, maybe like a sea lion, a California sea lion. And he's got a lot of experience with them, but he wants to see a lot of pictures just to get all those little details right, to be able to very accurately draw and illustrate those particular marine organisms. So I think I just got lucky by meeting him. If I'd gone to my publisher and said, hey, I'd really like to get, a different person involved that really knows that, I think they probably would have been able to work with me, but I don't think they would have been as good as as what Justin can do. I just saw his work and I approached him, and I guess I could have approached Wyland, who's a famous whale artist, and maybe he would do them, but that would probably be pretty expensive. But we're kind of getting Justin early on in his career. I got a feeling he's going to be really famous with his artwork, and maybe I'll be able to say in years to come, yeah, we actually got him on the book when he was first starting out.
All right, well, the next question is, do you see yourself moving away from the 3-year revision cycle in favor of a more as-needed approach?
Yeah, maybe. Usually in 3 years, though, there's enough stuff that happens that it really does need to be updated. Like one of the things we just barely got into the last edition was Hurricane Sandy and the havoc that it wreaked all on the East Coast. So, that was something that we just put a picture and a brief description, but there's so much more to add about that. And what does that mean about global warming? And then also the recent hurricane in the Philippines. So there's usually enough current events that happen that it's really kind of a good idea to really update it. And the other thing is, for this next edition as well, we have now this new tool called Mastering that I talked about, and that keeps statistics about what every student across the country and anywhere in the world that uses Mastering, where did they struggle on these questions? What took them a long time? What was a common misunderstanding that that caused them to get that incorrect in there? So now we've got this really data-rich tool to allow us to say, look, students aren't getting this concept and this concept and this concept. So I want to use that to really look at what are students getting and how can I explain that better? And what do I need, maybe a new animation and maybe some additional graphics to be able to help students really understand that. So yeah, we're kind of on that 3-year cycle, which for me in my book is I think a pretty good cycle to be on. I suppose I could talk to them if there's really not much going on, there's nothing new to really put in the book, so we could extend that, and I think I could probably be successful with that. There's a colleague of mine that does a natural disasters book, Pat Abbott. He teaches at San Diego State, or I guess he's emeritus there. But I was talking to him, and he said, oh, I just envy your 3-year cycle. I'm on a 2-year cycle. So because there's all these natural disasters that occur around the world that have to be updated in his book. So it could even be shorter, I suppose. But I think 3 years for oceanography just about nails it. There's enough new stuff, enough new technology, enough new things to put in there to make it substantially different than the previous edition.
Okay, I have a comment and then a couple of questions. So one is, I like your comment on the box on how to read a science textbook. I did a small chapter in my 1990 textbook called How to Read a Science Textbook. It is a great idea.
Beautiful. Yeah, very nice. 1990, boy, that was groundbreaking then, This is new to the 11th edition, which just came out in mine. I wish I had seen a box like that, but whoever wrote that, I applaud your efforts in writing that, and I hope it helps students. That's really the bottom line. How can we make this a more effective tool to help students study with it and learn the material in the ways that are best for them to learn?
All right, his question is, do you have experience with online distance learning and teaching?
Yes, I do. I have a lot of experience. In fact, my contract load is to teach 5 classes per semester. It's a typical community college load. And so I teach the majority of my classes online. And I've been doing so. I created an oceanography online class 7 years ago. And I've been teaching it ever since. So, for instance, this semester I'm teaching 4 online sections and 1 face-to-face. So I actually do the majority of my teaching. And I really like teaching online for a variety of reasons. We could, that's probably a separate conversation. But especially having the book, the book is just what I need to teach. And that's why I got into writing it. I wanted something really good that I could use in class. So having the book and teaching online seem to go hand in hand, because really I'm not there to present as much. I've got some things that I have live office hours and some things where I interact. And there is a lot of interaction with discussion boards. But, if students have good reading skills and they can read and understand the book, they probably don't need me up there standing and telling them to read the book and what's important in the book. They can actually get that out of the book. So I like having my own book. It's just what I need to teach effectively in the online environment.
Okay, this is a question following up from the discussion on illustrations. Do you pay for your illustrations, or does the publisher pay for them? And I'm adding this. Is that something that was in your contract, or something you had to kind of talk about later?
Right, yeah, that's specified in every contract. So we do a new contract with each edition, and it's specified how many new line figures. So before the contract gets written up, my editor will contact me and say, what is your revision plan? And I keep a list in my work copy of the book of how many figures I'd like to update, and I'll go through and I'll make a list of which ones I really would like, to be updated to have somebody like Justin work on. So that the wording of that thing goes right, and then I'll add a little fudge factor, maybe like 10%. So typically it might be on the order of like in the whole book, maybe like 70 or 80 new figures, and also maybe 30 or 40 new images, so new pictures for a photo researcher to go out and get. And they just need the numbers to figure that out. So I don't pay for any of that. It's my publisher that pays for that, and that's part of my contract. And I don't keep too close track of that. I kind of give them an estimate of what I'm thinking, and so then they go out and they work with their art studios, or we work with an illustrator like Justin to contract out, to do so many figures. And again, they're ranked on complexity. If they're very complex, they're more expensive, and all these other things. But I just kind of give them an idea of which ones I'd like to actually revise, and then they put that exact number in the contract. So, and that's at no charge to me. That's what their expense is, and what they expect to pay for those number of figures, and also for those new photos.
Okay, we probably have time for maybe one more question. What kind of a formal agreement did you make with Hal when you came on as a co-author? Was it a legal agreement? Did you have a separate agreement with the publisher? For example, I see that on one of the last editions that you did with him, I think it was the 8th edition, your name appears first. Was that part of your agreement with Hal?
Well, when I first started this, way back when, I got sent this contract, and it all looked pretty official, and, I didn't really know what I was doing. And at the time, I didn't know there's such a thing as a literary lawyer, that people deal with these contracts. So that's the advice that I would give, is that, TAA has literary lawyers that they can recommend that you can send your contract to, and they will look at it and say, well, this really limits you down the road, and this doesn't. And, frankly, I didn't even know what was going to happen with the book. Would it even go to another edition when I first started with the 6th? So, I signed it rather naively, not knowing anything about that. And there was wording in there about our royalty split, but that was kind of the extent of it. It was that Hal and I kind of negotiated amongst ourselves. It's like, it was Hal who suggested it. He said, you're doing the majority of the work on it. It should really be your name first, and so I was very honored by that, and it was really kind of a proper thing to do. The name Thurman has a lot of name recognition in oceanography, but with a couple editions, I was starting to get name recognition as well. So it will continue to be Trujillo and Thurman, even since Hal has passed on. And we have it, the initial contract I signed actually had the royalty split for, up to the 11th edition and beyond. And for me, when I signed it, I thought, well, I don't really know what I'm doing with this, and it all sounds good, but the advice I'd recommend, have a literary lawyer look it over. Actually, I've got a pretty favorable contract because I've got grandfathered in on several of these exclusions. But when I first started, I had no idea what I was doing, and I signed it rather naively. So I guess my advice is don't make that same mistake. Get somebody to really look at it.
So are you planning on bringing on another co-author? Or are you doing it yourself?
In fact, I am. Yeah, I am. I actually went to a conference, an oceanography conference in New Orleans last year. And I met a guy who has perfect qualifications. He teaches at a community college in Florida. And I just like he was a presenter at the same session that I was at. And I don't know, we just kind of hit it off. And I got talking to him about it, and I ran the idea by him, and he said he'd love to be involved in it. And he sent me some writing samples. So I think we're going to start him in slow and have him responsible for a few chapters in the next edition. And then if that works out well and we work together well, which I think we will, then he'd be brought in as an additional co-author.
Okay, well, that's all the questions that we have. And so thank you so much, Al, for sharing your expertise with us. And thank you all for participating in today's presentation.
Well, you're welcome. I really enjoyed it. And there were some good questions, so thank you.
Thank you. Writing and Revising, the 20-Year Evolution of an Oceanography Textbook is an educational presentation brought to you by the Text and Academic Authors Association.